you think of Gyarados in Generation 4's overuse, the first thing that comes to many people's minds is it being the catalyst for competitive Pokemon's most infamous rant, Vex levels. Others think of Gyarados being the most potent Dragon Dance user and the sheer immediate power that it has that many Pokemon run electric coverage just to be able to handle it. The Dragon Dance set is probably one of the most flexible sets in DPP, especially coming from a Pokemon such as Gyarados that has a very solid move pool that complements it. With that being said though, the prototypical Gyarados moveset is Dragon Dance, Waterfall. That's like the two moves that you never drop on Gyarados. And the last two moves is generally where you start seeing some variations. The two most popular last moves on Gyarados is Ice Fang and EQ. Generally, it just gets the job done, right? With Ice Fang, you're just covering everything. EQ, you cover like your Steel types. Ice Fang, you just cover Breloom, like other grass types, and like the Dragon types in particular, which is like great and all. And generally, it's Statsprit. It's running Adamant Nature. Something that we should probably get out of the way is, why would you not run Jolly Nature on a DD Gira? And, you know, the answer to that is actually just pretty simple. You just miss out on power at the end of the day, like there is. DPP is not so fast that you need to run like plus speed, because like speed tiers haven't gotten to that point yet. So there's that to keep in mind, because like the only Pokemon that are really outspeeding Gyarados is generally something like Aerodactyl or Jolteon, but those are much less uncommon, or rather, to be more specific, Aerodactyl you're only using it on lead 99.9% of the time, and in Jolteon most people do not really take it seriously, so there's just that to consider. The other thing to consider with Gyarados is that, like, what about item choice, right? Like, Wakanberry, that's like kind of listed as the most popular choice, right? Because it has quad electric weakness, so, you know, hey, Wakanberry reduces electric coverage damage, great and all, right? Problem with that is that generally that's pretty restricting. You want to be able to run it on teams that can keep rocks off the field, so this means Azelf offense, and Aerodactyl hyper offense, you know, like just stuff that has built-in taunt, all that jazz, right? That's when you want to run it. Or if you don't have that, then you need to run it with like a rapid spinner such as Starmie, for example, or like Donphan on more balanced builds. But we can get more into that later. Another variation for the last two moves that you might want to run is like Substitute T-Wave, and you're probably wondering, why would you run this? Like Mono Gira, that just seems a little bit weird, like you probably want to cover somewhere. The idea is that you use like Thunder Wave, you're really just you're playing on the whole like paralysis hacks archetype, like Paraspam as people like to call it. That's why you might run this. It's great on like more offensive takes of a paralysis spam, so these are teams that are centered around spreading paralysis in order to get like a great abuser, like a slow breaker such as Machamp or Rhyperior, to like kind of just break through the opposing team by just paralyzing everything. So generally that is why you might want to run this set, for example. And Sub also lets Gira block status, so there's that to take into account. And then yeah, Leftovers. Leftovers also works great on the regular Dragon Dance set of like Waterfall, EQ, Ice Fang. And then the other thing is like, why might you deviate? Generally, a big issue with DD Gyarados is that against fatter teams that are relying on physical walls such as Skarmory, Gyarados might have trouble breaking those. And with that being said though, like, you know, you might run taunt with it and drop a coverage move. Generally this is good on offensive teams that desperately need help breaking stall, or like teams that don't need Gyarados' coverage as much, like you're not relying on Gyarados as your primary sweeper, but like, you know, that's just something you can do. Also really good for doing stuff like preventing, you know, toxic, whatever, or taunt, or not really taunt, but Thunder Wave. And then, like, yeah, like Lumberry, I'm showing like this set because that's like the set that most people will recognize when they think of taunt from that infamous bit, from that one infamous game that I've already mentioned. So, you know, that's why you might want to do it. Other moveset options that you might want to consider is something like Outrage, or even like Double Edge. And you might be wondering, okay, why would you run those? The big thing is that Outrage and Double Edge they have 20 extra base power. They're base 120 moves, although they have their own notable drawbacks. For example, Outrage, you are now able to break through Kingdra. You might run, say, something like Waterfall Outrage, a DD with EQ, and you're running it with a Lumberry because you're like, hey, I just want to brute force past something like a Kingdra, or still be able to brute force, get that extra power to punch through like an offensive Starmie, because Starmie can normally live +1 EQ after rocks. That's a fun fact. So like that's just something to consider. Because like offensive Starmie, like say you come in, you take rocks, it takes rocks damage, and then it just barely lives. The Gyarados is +1 EQ, and then it just gets revenged by T-Bolt. We don't want that. That, like, if it's not running Wakan, for example, so, you know, that's when you might want to pull out the Outrage. And then you still get to hit the Dragon types, so, like, that's a nice side bonus. And something like Lumberry just makes sense because of, like, Outrage's drawback. If you're running something like Double Edge, it's like, oh, hey, you don't really like the, you know, the lock-in nature of something like a Outrage, where you're just locked into a move for 2 to 3 turns, and then you're open to being revenged by something like a Jirachi with Thunder Punch, for example. Like, that's just something to take into account. And like, generally, it's like every like coverage that it can run has a downside, and of course, I would not be remiss to not mention one of the more hipster options. Natural Gift Gyarados. You're probably wondering, what the hell is Natural Gift? What does it do? Natural Gift is kind of like a Gen 4's idea of like a physical hidden power, but the caveat of the hidden power in this case is actually dependent on the berry that it's holding. For example, in this screenshot here, I am showing a Lychee Berry. A Lychee Berry turns Natural Gift into a grass type move. This is really useful because it lets you hit something like Swampert, Quagsire, and Suicune like all in one slot, because grass type coverage is something that Gyarados does not normally get. So that's just a really, really nice application of that move, and that's when you might want to run it. And with that being said though, like the item, and as I was just talking about the Lychee Natural Gift, item choice on Gyarados, generally, for example, the Cranberry, like I said, really, really good on like offensive teams that can keep rocks off, right? And then you might want to run Leftovers on DD Gyra because DPP being a sand generation, which with Perma Weather, this means that, like, you know, Lefties lets you be a little bit more resilient in terms of Gyarados' longevity. And then of course there's Lumberry, which lets a Gyarados tech pass something like Jirachi trying to fish for paralysis, lets you punish that. And then, or it might let you not have to deal with the drawbacks of a move like Outrage's confusion effect. So like, that's why you might want to run those, for example. And then the DD set is like, that's great and all on Gyarados, but Gyarados has other great applications too when it comes to using it. Choice Band Gyarados, this is a really, really good set. What you can do on Gyarados is that you could just run an elite slot and you're just getting that +1 1 power right off the bat. Like you're able to like just spam moves like Waterfall. You're able to spam moves like Stone Edge, Ice Pack, you name it, right? Right, that's the great thing about CB Gyarados, is that you kind of just have that immediate power without needing to spend a turn setting up. You can punch holes early on and you can break through Lum leads. That's just like some things it can do really nicely. So that's why you might want to run it. That being said, and it's pretty linear. Now, defensive Gyarados, this is not something you see very often, but it most certainly exists. Generally, you're running Rest, Sleep, Talk, Waterfall, Roar. Sometimes Roar can be swapped out for T-Wave if you don't need the phasing from defensive Gyarados. Generally, you're using this as something like a Inferno check. You're using this to like phase out stuff, like help like give Gyarados some actual longevity. Generally, if you're running Rest Talk Gyarados, you need to run spin support. So this means something like a Fortress, Donphan, even like defensive Starmie, but that's a little bit anti-synergistic, but like you get the general gist, right? That's generally when you might want to run it, and you probably want to run it with something like a CB Tar. Or like just Pursuit support in general that can punish like spin blockers such as Rotom. And yeah, you know, like Gyarados, it's a great Pokemon in DPP, very versatile. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.